So my name is Reid Burke. I'm an engineer on the YUI team, and I'm going to talk to you about our easy testing interface. I created this because testing, I believe, was too difficult when I was first when I first started, and I still believe it today. Things when you're developing, I believe that if you want to have experiences that reach the most amount of people, you need to be testing on devices used by these people, right? And far too often, because of time, because of any other, any number of reasons, because it's too difficult, we don't do that. And I think that needed to change, and it's about time. So what I'm going to show you to start out, to hit this point home, is an example. And this is Hello World. It's about as simple as you can get. But it's a little bit more than just a Hello World. This is actually a broken web application. So the slides are running in Chrome. It's a web application. It's broken, but none of you know how it's broken. And this is a problem. It's a problem for me because I don't have anyone else. If this is an open source project, you might be looking at this and think it's great. I know that that's not the case, but none of you do. And so what I do to get around this problem as much as possible is I write tests that can be automated. And I write tests that wind up looking like this. And now everyone knows what the problem is. The problem is that I should have been more specific with my first slide. I should have been saying hello YUIConf because I'm at YUIConf and not hello world. And I'm sure everyone relates to this, right? They're going, whenever you want to test something, when you're testing in development mode, you're going and reloading everything, and it's kind of a pain. Especially if you're using something like YUI Test, we feel like our story could have been much better for that. So when you're there's another problem with this as well, right? So I could just go right now and fix this. I could go and make the change. I could come back in here. I could refresh the browser, see if it works or not. But the problem is I haven't only tested it in Chrome. I haven't tested it in other browsers. And if I wanted to do that, I would actually need to go and switch to another browser and hit refresh. I would need to go to, like say, my mobile device. If I have a mobile device here, you can hopefully see this. So I have this, and then if I go to the next slide, this is kind of what we're all dealing with here, right, is the fact that it's too difficult for me to go and be reasonably expected to test every single combination of browser.
Can you turn on the room mic?
Yeah. I didn't know it wasn't on, actually. Which one of these is it? Testing 1, 2. Awesome. You guys can hear me a lot better. One sec. So, where was I? Testing, right. So, with Yeti, this is made a lot simpler. And with Yeti, the first question I want to know, the first question that isn't answered by me going to every browser and hitting refresh is, what is broken? If this is a really simple problem, right, this is just something that's checking text and making sure that it matches a string. But in reality, our problems are never so simple, right? We have things that can cause regressions, right? You might have a bug fix that you're doing for IE7 and it breaks IE6, or vice versa, breaks modern browsers. And so really, we're kind of just hoping, right? Whenever we do tests, whenever we're running these, whenever we go to a QA lab or go and open up a VM and hitting one browser, a lot of times we skip running it everywhere, right? Especially in development mode, because we don't have the time, and because really you want to be writing code and not writing tests. Tests are a great idea. There's something I think everyone in this room recognizes as a great idea. That's why you're here. But it's just something, especially for the web, considering we have over a dozen environments that are on our A grade browser list, right? And you typically, if you're lucky, you get to fall back on some continuous integration results if you're lucky, and it's really unfortunate, and it's not as easy as I'd like. So how does Yeti solve this? The first problem, right, is I want to know where it's broken. And if you want to know that, it's as easy as one command. Instantly, after running this command, I get feedback from all the browsers that I have connected to the system I have set up on my laptop. My laptop's a MacBook Air, and I just have a few browsers here, so you get the point. But basically, testing should be this simple, right? Testing should have been this simple from the get-go, and that's why I created Yeti. The second thing that I want to make sure of, right, is now that I'm here, and I know that this is a problem that's everywhere. I instantly know that this is broken on all my browsers, right? This isn't something that I should flop. This isn't something that affects a C-grade browser. This is something that affects everything. So what I want to do right now is actually want to go and fix this. So this is what I'm going to do. In my slides, I'm going to actually change this, right? So now I'm pretty sure I fixed it. I'm going to rerun Yeti again. And it turns out I made a mistake. And this is something that I think everyone can also relate to. They thought they fixed it. It might have worked in one browser, but it broke others. It caused a regression, right? Right now in development, before I even commit anything, before that chance has the ability to affect anybody else, I actually found out that this is broken, and I made the problem worse. It could have been that I made, if this is a more complicated example, I could have fixed one browser, but I could have broke dozens of others. And that's also unacceptable. So now before I had the chance to inflict this pain on anybody, I can actually go back to my code here, yeti.html. So I'm going to go ahead and fix the correct slide, because I changed the first one instead of the second. And just the same as before, now I'm sure that it works everywhere that I care about. So this is Yeti. This is what it does today. And in the next hour or so, you're going to actually see how how Yeti helps you, in what cases Yeti will work for you, and you're going to leave here with all the information you need to do this on your computer today. So I'm really excited to share this all with you. And so we have a lot to cover. Let's get right down to it. But before I do that, I hate failing tests. Awesome. Moving on. This is the problem, right? You're either missing out on bugs because you're not testing everywhere for whatever reasons. It takes too long. This is typically the problem for me. Or you are dealing with complicated tools. And not necessarily, I'm not trying to say that there's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of tools that work better in certain cases than not others. And where does Yeti fit in all of this? Well, let's find out. So front-end test runners. I picked a few to talk about today. There's dozens and dozens of these tools that exist out there. And these are some ones that especially in this community, I hear a lot about. And that's Selenium, we have Test Swarm, and we have JS Test Driver. So these all are in this domain of tools that aim to make our lives easier as front-end engineers, right? And so why another one? Why create Yeti? Well, the first two, I'm going to tackle the first two first. These have a different focus than Yeti. Yeti right now is very committed to helping you in development mode fix all of your fix bugs while you're in development mode before it has a chance to affect anyone, and while you're, say, doing a huge refactor and these kinds of things, right? When you look at these two tools, they're actually very good at what they do, but they do so after you've already broken something, right? Essentially, because you checked in something that's broken. These tools are meant to work in a type of continuous integration environment, typically, and most definitely with infrastructure that's dedicated to testing. In the case of Selenium, you're having to dedicate some machines, or at least partially dedicate machines with driver software. And with Test Swarm, you don't have to dedicate your machines that run the test, but you do have to dedicate a machine to serve the web application that will deliver these tests, because it depends on architecture, the LAMP architecture stack. So, like I said, and this is very important. This is something you need to. If you take away a couple of things, this is one you need to take away, is that it's focused on before the commit. That's what it's really good at. If you're considering on replacing, taking everything you heard yesterday from Nicholas's great talk about YUI Test coverage and YUI Test with Selenium driver, that is absolutely what you should do. That's not the point. Yeti is really good at development mode, whereas you don't get, there's a lot of things that are very nice about continuous integration systems. They solve a different problem though, right? Continuous integration is required because when you're integrating with other people's work, or if you can't test everything that you have on your personal system, maybe you don't have on my MacBook Air, right, I can't possibly test all 20 combinations and run all those emulators. If I have a continuous integration environment, maybe it can cover more heroic desktop browser versions that I don't have, right? So it definitely has its place, but Yeti fills something that I feel has been missing for a long time. But that's not to say Yeti is the first to do this. Yeti. I should also mention that Yeti is personal, and what I mean by that is that it's not to be necessarily shared. Right now, what Yeti helps you with is with when you're running something on your computer, right? It's not necessarily at the moment able to help you with say a group environment with maybe you want to share have one central Yeti instance, right? So I should mention that that's another thing that you should know about Yeti. So I haven't mentioned JS Test Driver yet, and I want to tackle that because it also recognizes that whenever you run, that running tests before you commit is very important. And it works well for it too, right? That's something that I looked at JS Test Driver before making Yeti for sure, but it fell short for me because it didn't fit the needs of what YUI needed at the time when I wrote Yeti, and it still doesn't meet my needs. The reason for that is twofold. One is it requires JavaScript test files, and that's fine. We right now, YUI, for example, we have tests that are in HTML documents. They're pretty light. Most of them just have JavaScript and then some HTML fixtures. And that's still covered. If you want to have some HTML and not have to create that all with the DOM inside of your test with JS Test Driver, you can actually include it in comments they call HTML doc comments, right? But we wanted to run our tests existing. We wanted to run the tests as they were. We didn't want to have to rewrite everything. We wanted to also have the ability to take our existing tests and run them in browsers just as we always had. Because that's what the community expects. We shouldn't be forcing people to install JS Test Driver just to run YUI's tests. So we wanted to run these HTML documents. And for HTML support in JS Test Driver, that's a to-do item for them. That's something I looked on their wiki page on code.google, and that's something like of two things they want to have in their future. They definitely want HTML support. And after talking about Yeti today, you're going to see why that's very important. So JS Test Driver requires tests to be executed with their own test framework, but there's ways around this for YUI. I was aware of this. There's actually you can create wrappers, right, that will transform these tests, or create scripts that can transform them from say HTML and then do some either scraping and convert it, or you could actually have a module that will report tests back to the JS Test Driver test runner after passes or failures on YUI. But whenever I tried these, and whenever I tried, making a pass at making a better tool for this, I was disappointed because there's a lot of things that I lost that were very difficult for me to work around. For example, I lost the ability to use YUI Loader, which really was a non-starter, and I started hacking around that. But I really started losing a lot of what JS Test Driver was made for, and it achieves its performance because it requires you to use just JavaScript. Whenever you run a new test with JS Test Driver, it's actually whenever you make a change to a test that's already ran on your test swarm, if you will, it's actually just transforming or sending the part of the test that changed, and that gives you high performance. It gives you results maybe even faster than Yeti, but it also comes with a lot of disadvantages, like not able to work with HTML. So to summarize all this, right, we didn't get support for HTML out of the box. We like YUI Test, and we wanted to continue to use our existing tests. So we covered these three, and they didn't quite fulfill our needs one way or another. Either they weren't concerned with before the commit, or they didn't concern themselves with HTML documents, which is what we had as our test, right? So what we made was Yeti, and why should you care? Why should you use this? Besides what I've already talked about, I'm going to go over the features of it. So basically, it works with your unmodified YUI tests. So you don't have to change anything. You don't have to add a YUI module, or a Yeti module to your tests. There's no JavaScript you have to include. It just works. You run yeti.html, or Yeti your test.html. If you can run it in a browser and see the results in a console, or see them on your browser console, it's going to work. And this is very important. You don't have to set anything up. The other thing I should mention, and this is a slide I put in just because I heard from a lot of you, what kinds of tests is Yeti good for? Is it good for unit or functional or what have you? And it's really good for all of them, right? That's an implementation detail. YUI Test can work for unit tests, testing just a reminder to test the unit functionality, as well as functional tests, which may test a stack of functionality. Say, you're making a request to YQL, and that depends on an additional service that isn't quite encompassed all in your test file, right? So that's up to you. So it works with both. It works the same way that, say, Selenium driver, any of these other driver solutions or test launchers, I like to call them, work. The other thing that's really important is Yeti's extremely fast. The whole problem that I started with is that I can't test because testing takes too long. So if I made a slow test launcher, I just saved a few keystrokes. I didn't save myself any time. So the Yeti's extremely fast, and it does this in a few ways. It gives you feedback on the command line as quick as it can. It runs tests as quick as possible. It gives you test results as soon as it gets information, and that's really important. It doesn't. I try to remove anything that might slow the process down. And as you see, even on this underpowered computer, you can see it works really well. The other thing is that it advances to the next test immediately, and that's something with test form out of the box. It actually has some delay in there, and I didn't like that. Even though you can configure it, I believe the default case when you install Yeti, I don't want you to have to do any configuration. You've already spent enough time setting it up, so it makes a lot of assumptions for you that you want your tests immediately. You want to benefit from the time savings that this software gives you. And it does that by running in parallel with all the browsers you have at once, much similar to how TestSwarm does it. There's a lot of good ideas in TestSwarm. I copied some of them. So what you get with testing before the commit is you're testing closer to your change. And that's really important too, for more than the reasons that I already talked about. When you're testing closer to the actual time you create a bug or you fix a bug, it's in your head. You just worked on it. You just made a change. And when you're doing that, it's way better to get that than even if it's caught by a continuous integration system a day later, or if it's caught by your QA staff maybe even weeks later. And this is a problem that I had time and time again with my last job. I would fix something, thought it worked, or someone else would fix something and broke something. And either way, there's a ticket that gets opened because it doesn't work on IE6. That might go away, but then we still have IE7. You still have all these other. It's a problem that's not going to go away. Just because IE6 is going away doesn't necessarily mean that our problems are solved, and we certainly shouldn't treat it as our problems being solved. So getting back to the slide, you're testing closer to your change. It's fresh in your head. Once you're able to fix bugs not only before they get a chance to get shared with people, but you're also fixing bugs while it's in context, while it's fresh in your head. And I think you're going to see, once you start using Yeti, that's very important. You run Yeti from the command line. You've already seen it, and this is how it looks. Some things I'm going to point out here, though, is that you've seen some test failures, and this is I'm going to explain kind of a little bit of my rationale with this. So with here, you get a nice summary that it's all colorized. You see that it's a big X. You get a summary at the end of it all that tells you how many tests passed and failed, and it gives you all the information that you would get when you're running this from YUI Test. You get the same information that you would get in your test console. Yeti's fault tolerant. It recovers from syntax errors and 404s. If you give it a bad test that has a JavaScript error or a test that doesn't exist, it will still, you don't have to necessarily refresh your page. It'll just keep on going after a timeout. And this is also, in addition to fault tolerance of that nature, it also reports uncaught exceptions on your page. And so right here you see the exception that you would see in your browser from instead of getting a pop-up window that would stop testing. It also tells you about tests that you may have that don't have a doc type, meaning that they're not in standards mode. And because we have a lot of tests that actually that are pretty complicated and actually will go so far as checking computed styles, checking these kinds of things, that could be impacted by in some browsers in some ways. And really you should be using standards mode anyway. And so if you happen to mess up and miss that, it tells you about it. So it does a lot of things for you, so you don't have to stay in a browser. The thing is, with Yeti, I want you to be as far away from your browser as possible, if you can help it, right? If you're making functionality, if any of you are familiar with Nicholas's talk on scalable JavaScript architecture, you'll find that a lot of things you can component down, even if you're testing a widget that has a lot of user interface to it, you can abstract a lot of the functionality that's doing behind the scenes into a module that can then be tested in an automated fashion, or rather an automated fashion. And so, yeah, you'll find that works really well. It wants to keep you from a web browser if it can, and it wants to keep you closer to your editor because Yeti keeps you writing code. When testing is simple, you spend more time on writing code, right? You spend more time on writing more tests. And it's kind of addicting. When you're able to see feedback as quick as you just saw it, you actually wind up wanting to see that over and over again. It's actually, you get this, these good feelings from having, seeing everything turn green and then having a green summary at the bottom. It might sound really stupid, but seriously, once you try it, that does happen to you. You spend less time on boring things, right? You spend less time on avoiding tests because if you can't run them easy, what's the point? If you don't have a CI system, especially, then what's the point? A lot of times people are just going to write. What you'll typically do, right, is just edit something in your file, your JavaScript, and test that something works, and then remove it, and then check that in. So that's your testing. That's definitely in the realm of testing, but you're testing in like the worst way possible because you're not sharing it with anyone else, and you're not able to reproduce that at any other point in the future. So no matter what, you guys are always testing. You guys are always writing tests, even if you're not writing them in test files dedicated to the cause. And you guys really need to think about that, how much time that takes up, right? Every time that you make a quick fix and just verify that it works and move on, how much time does that waste in the future when some other fix, when your application gets bigger by regressions, right? And this was something that I learned the hard way over and over and over again. So this is also something to think about when thinking about Yeti. Is graded browser support, right? So we have a dozen-ish, it fluctuates all the time, environments you need to test, and we all understand the need for testing in multiple browsers. But it's a QA philosophy. It's not necessarily grading browsers, right? It's around because you can only test so much with your testing resources, with either your time or your QA team's time, or both, right? But so with this, right, with this restriction, it's typically because before tools like Yeti, you would have to, there's a lot of manual effort. There's a lot of setting up these tools that try to make our lives easier, like Selenium and TestSwarm and other whatever homegrown solutions you may have. But that's the thing, is right now you're spending all this time on either setting it up or running it manually. But what if you could test everything? If testing is made easy, then your web app will be more awesome. It's that easy. It's that simple because when you're testing, when you are able to quickly find these problems, you're going to have less problems. You're going to have a better experience for your users. You're going to be making more money. Your app will be more awesome if you use Yeti because Yeti makes testing easy. It's very important. Yeti does all these things just so that you're more productive, so that you're writing code, so you're writing more tests, and you're not refreshing a browser. This is something that I haven't yet covered, but it's also very important. Yeti is designed for the mobile future. We're already seeing graded browser support encompassing mobile devices as A grade, which means that you all should be testing against them. That's something that we're doing already, right? We're testing against mobile browsers. But when I was tasked with YUI's build system, our continuous integration system, right, that's supposed to be running tests for us, it didn't cover mobile devices because it was using Selenium. So if you have an iPad, iPhone, Palm device, Android phone, right, you can't install software on this phone that will that like Selenium, that would open up a browser and mechanize it in that way, right? You have to use what's already on the device, especially with things like iOS, right, where you don't even have a hope of jailbreaking if you're wanting to test the exact experience that your users are getting. So we needed a testing system that worked with these browsers and worked without any additional software, and that's exactly what Yeti gives you. And in the demo later, you're actually going to see this run on mobile devices and much more. But this is very important, is that we needed a way to not only test on the desktop, but we also needed a way and make testing easier, but we also needed to make testing easier for mobile devices. And you're going to see that in a little bit. So to recap, Yeti helps you test as close to your change as possible while it's fresh in your mind. Your tests are actual HTML documents. They're nothing special about it. If you can see it in your browser, you can use it. You can automate it or the launching of it in Yeti. It works with unmodified YUI tests. Nothing special about it. Your tests execute fast. It tolerates your mistakes, and it's designed for mobile. So that's the case for Yeti. And now I'm going to continue with reinforcing this point of why you should use testing tools in general. Well, testing the hard way adds up, and that's pretty obvious. But so when you're testing, when you're dealing with the world of testing, you'll notice that there's some tests that are harder than others. The first slide that you saw with Hello World, that was me testing a web application, even though it wasn't automated. No matter what you're doing, you're testing in some way, even if you're not calling it that. And so when dealing with tools like Yeti that deal with automated, the tests that like YUI Test, where you're actually programmatically going through it, instead of asking what tests can be made easy, it's really what can be automated, because that's what Yeti helps you with today. So the question of automation is maybe, because not everything that you're doing can be automated. You can automate a lot of it if you're making your JavaScript application correctly. But say user interface stuff like say widgets that you're dealing with, you can't write a test to tell you that your color scheme looks bad. That's stuff that you're going to have to test with a human, right? You're going to have to actually sit in front of a computer and deal with that. But most everything else can be automated. And I'm not done with this topic yet. If you've noticed Yeti's name, it's YUI's Easy Testing Interface. It's not the Easy Automated Testing Interface. So I'm going to definitely come back to this. But I'm going to continue with automation in that if you're not automating your tests, YUI Test is great. If you didn't see Nicholas's talk yesterday, check that out as soon as it gets on YUI Theater. It's a great talk, and it tells you all the praises of how you can not only just use YUI Test, but how you can also take advantage of its CI capabilities to actually give you even more coverage over this whole testing realm than what Yeti provides by itself in an automated way, right, where you're continuously testing in a centralized server, right? But YUI Test is modern. It has mocks, async tests. You get really nice testing names, right, where they're not something archaic. They're human readable, and it works with any framework that you may be using. So if you're not using, say, YUI 3, you're using something like jQuery, MooTools, whatever, your own framework, doesn't matter, because you can use YUI Tests. YUI Test is a concern for your development team or for you. It's not a concern for people that are actually using your software, right? So if you're new to testing, or if you're coming back to testing, and this doesn't matter what you're using, you probably want to consider YUI Test and at least give it a serious look. So use YUI Test, or at least use some kind of testing framework. But if a test can be automated, you should be using a framework. If you have something that can be covered pragmatic or with a program that can go through it and verify it, then you should be using a framework. And if you're using a test framework, you should be smart about it. You shouldn't be going to every phone that you're wanting to test. You should be automating the launching of it as well. And so I mentioned automation versus launching, and I pause a lot when saying either word because I want to make sure I'm saying it correctly. And this is an important distinction. Yeti is a test launcher, and what it does is launch tests. For automated tests, it reports results to you. So it's an important distinction to make in this talk, is that when I'm talking about test automation, a test launcher can actually launch more tests than just automated tests. Reloading to view YUI test results is a drag. I think that's pretty obvious, and it doesn't scale. So if you're currently doing this to fix bugs right now, that might be working for you. But if you actually, once you get burned a few times, like I did, I spent a year without writing this solution, dealing with mobile devices, dealing with IE 6 through 8, and dealing with multiple operating systems. It doesn't scale. And you're just not going to do it. And if you say that you're going to do it, you're lying, because it's impossible. So you need test automation, and you need a way to launch it. So where does Yeti fit in this picture? Selenium's complicated, as we talked about before. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use it, because Selenium has its place in CI, right? Once you set it up, it's a complicated system that has a lot of moving parts. I speak with experience. You're dealing with Hudson. You're plugging it in to Selenium. You're plugging that into you're plugging this into could be 5, 6 dedicated slave hosts, right, that are actually opening browsers and mechanizing them. So, but it's reliable. It's been around for a long time and it's not going anywhere. So it works really well for that. But it doesn't work for mobile, and that's really important. Test Swarm works for mobile, and it's a nice option, but it requires dedicated LAMP infrastructure. And JS Test Driver excels at performance at the expense of too many features. So test closer to the change, test without infrastructure. You're testing quickly, and you test what you already have, the HTML documents that you're used to. Yeti's a great fit for this. And I'm going to show you exactly how we're using Yeti at YUI, and how we've been able to have our last several releases be well tested and have us be focused more on writing code rather than going back and forth with mobile devices. So I'm going to switch over here and go to here. So I'm going to first just show you with the test browsers that I have on my computer. I have a Firefox, a Safari, and then up here I have Chrome. So I'm going to run this PHP script. This is on my GitHub gist, and I'll have URLs at the end of the talk. But this is a very simple script. All it's doing, it's stupid simple. This is just the head of YUI3. It's basically taking all of our smoke tests and then running Yeti on it. There's nothing else but that. So with this, it's actually going to invoke Yeti with all these different tests. And what you can see it actually work, right? And you can see how fast it is. So it's taking all these, and we're getting instant feedback whether or not things work or not. You can see how it's running. And you can see how fast it is. We actually have some stats here that are showing you. The BPM is how many beats that it gets per minute, and the beat is whenever a test passes, fails, or is skipped, or whether a test completed or didn't. There's some tests in here that, for the demo, I didn't change anything. And this is what you're actually seeing right now is our cache tests, which depend, and some other tests we have that depend on, that are more like integration tests, like, say, I/O, that depend on Apache running. And so because Yeti doesn't simulate anything else, it tries to isolate the stuff like running a specific web server. It's not going to work. So tests like these will time out. But you can see here, typically I have another XML that will run these faster because I'll just take out the test that runs slower than others. Let's see if I can go over here and if I got, let's see. That died. So yeah, this is just going to continue and go on and on and on. But what I can do, I was trying to get a demo of this on another computer that will have that XML file intact. But yeah, you can see this is what we're able to do. Right, is we actually have iOS devices hooked up to this. We have Palm devices hooked up to this. Dave somewhere in here has this crazy setup where he has Palm OS emulators, Android emulators, and everything all pointed at a Yeti server that he controls. And so whenever he makes any changes, it just runs on everything. And this is still a lot better than me running every single test, doing these kinds of things manually, right? As you can see. So one thing though, I want to show that this is so cool. Let's see here, run demo. So with this. There we go. So I have my slides right here. And if I run Yeti on them, so I'm going to go to URL here, actually. Let me make sure this works. So this will run on my computer at home, actually. So this is on my home computer. It'll take a while because it's going through the internet. But eventually it'll come through. And so I want to try something. I don't know if this is how awesome this is going to be, or if it's just going to fail completely, considering that Wi-Fi can be slow and everything. So yeah, cool. It's just really slow, but it'll work. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you this guy right here. So I just connected it to this URL. And I'm going to switch back here so I can show you that URL. Everyone go to this with your phone, with your laptop, with whatever. So you're going to actually run my slide deck, and I'm going to get it from all of you. So If you go to here, it's going to continue to be on the top of this. So it's just waiting for tests, right, on here. And so what I'm going to do is on my computer, I'm just going to go and rerun that same command that you just saw. And it should just start kicking off pretty soon. It's going through the internet, so it's loading all of YUI. It's loading Upstage and everything. And obviously, you want to be using this on Wi-Fi, but this is going through on my phone right here. It's going through 3G. So it's going to take a long time to download all the resources. Yeti does cache busting, right? So every time I run a test, it's doing it brand new. It's doing it without any. It caches it while you're running tests. So if I had, say, Yeti.html, Yeti2.html, Yeti3.html, if I was running many at once, it would cache in that run, but it won't cache later on. I would take your time. You're all hammering my home computer, so. But I do have. I'm starting to get some results here, and it's starting to work. Wow, that's really cool. So basically, I think what I'm going to do is just come back to my Yeti results after it finally, gives me something more than just one of your results. Cool. So I'll come back to and show you the results. Right now, they're coming in. Cool. So I want to give you a listing of JavaScript web app tools in JavaScript. Yeti is it. Yeti is written in JavaScript, and it runs on Node. And this is I mentioned this because not because just to say how cool Node is, but it actually takes advantage of a lot of things that Node gives me, or gives anyone that works with Node. In particular, Yeti is tested really well. It benefits from asynchronous behavior-driven tests that are using the Vows framework, which is it's a small framework that's just dedicated to servers that are written in Node. And because everything that Yeti does is pretty much over HTTP, this made a lot of sense, and it was specialized for Node.js. So this really, Yeti itself, I'm able to make changes to Yeti quickly. I'm able to ship Yeti releases fast because I'm doing the same thing that I'm telling you guys, right? Because everything is tested, whenever I'm developing something, I'm developing without fear that it's breaking because I'm testing it everywhere, and I know that Yeti's working. And that's exactly what I'm telling you guys to do with your YUI tests, right? So I can actually show that working. Oh, cool! That's really awesome. I didn't have Firefox 3.6, so there's a different version of Chrome. That's cool. Got a few Chrome. Wow, someone's on 7. That's crazy. We have looks like an iPad maybe came in. We have this one's already done, so it's just sitting waiting for more. But going back to this, yeah, so I'll come back to it. It's just kind of fun. So I'm going to talk about one more thing. So I had this slide that talked about Yeti as being a test automation versus launching, right? Automating tests versus launching them. And I wanted that distinction to be very clear because that's something that I'm very concerned about. When talking with you guys at this conference, I actually realized a lot of you not only have automated tests. Most people I talk to that understand the importance of testing already have some automated tests, but they also want to be able to take care of the case when you want to, that you can't automate. You want to take care of the case when you change 5 colors. You want to know how it looks. You want to know how it looks on your iPad. You want to know how it looks on an Android phone, or because not all Android phones are the same, a variety of them, right? Because you want your web app to look good. And that's not something you can necessarily write a test for, right? Because all of these displays and hardware are different. And it's also applicable to your desktop, right? When you're trying to see how well something works, right? And this kind of thing, you can't really, you have to be in front of it and test it, but that should be made easier. So it's excellent at automated tests right now, and all of you see this. And it's apparently handling all of you guys using it really well. So what about manual tests? What about these tests that you don't have automation for? So like I said, these are difficult to automate. You're opening tests in dozens of these browsers, but still, you're still testing. Your test is your website, but it's just not automated. And I want you to be able to launch them automatically with Yeti. And that's what this is. This is an experimental branch that I've started a couple of days ago, and I pushed it last night from my experimentation with it. This is designed to launch manual tests, and it complements automated tests. If it doesn't find a YUI test, then it will give you an interface for you to either pass or fail the test, right? Pass or fail the browser that shows up in the iframe that Yeti opens. So it builds on the fact that web tests are actually websites. Just because you don't have an automated test on a website doesn't mean that Yeti shouldn't be able to cover it. And supporting HTML is key to that, right? Because if we didn't work with HTML, if we didn't work with the web testing, then you're actually just making a specialized JavaScript testing framework that works on a website, but that's not the same as testing web applications. So Yeti makes you a better front-end engineer today. It does that by handling things that can be automated, which you'll find are a lot of your tests. But we're not done, and you should expect more, and that's what I'm expecting. That's what I'm starting to build. But what I do have for you today is Yeti 0.12. It improves on previous versions by tolerating faults better, like I mentioned in the talk, and it has a few bug fixes for you. It also has the nice interface that you saw on the iPad, and down here, right, gives you some stats that are kind of nice. So I promised that you'd all be able to run Yeti, and this is how you do it. If you don't have Node installed already, you just need to go to node.js.org and install it. I would recommend installing their stable 0.2 branch of it. They have that as a tarball that works on Linux, Windows under Cygwin, and macOS 10.5 and later. If you have an Intel processor, I haven't tested it on PowerPC. And then you install NPM, and NPM is available from a similar website. It's Node's package manager. It's what became the de facto Node software installation system. And then you just run command. npm install Yeti will give you the latest version of Yeti, and you're going to be able to run all the things that I'm talking about. I would encourage you to explore the code. I could definitely use your feedback. It's available on YUI's GitHub account, just as you'll find everything else that YUI has to offer. Bugs and forums are available on YUILibrary.com. And with the knowledge that I'm hoping that this becomes the canonical testing, the way you test websites, I could really use some help in that, right? I'm now working on this in my spare time, and I could really, if this is what you guys want, then I can't do this by myself. I'm trying, and I could definitely, at the very least, use your feedback. You know, if this doesn't cover everything that you want, tell me. I'd love to hear. So when I started this presentation, I said this, that you're either missing out on bugs or you're dealing with complicated tools. And I have it crossed out because it's not true anymore, because you're either missing out on bugs or you're not using Yeti. Thanks.